Hi, I'm Rajiv Ramdeni, and we're gonna talk about Mauritian identity today for our roundtable. I'm gonna briefly present our lecturers here. We have Claire Moran and Mylène Biquet and Vedita Kaulisa. So, do you wanna start with?
Sure. Well, so I will obviously be talking about, thank you, Rajiv. We'll be talking about as an Australian perspective before coming to Mauritius. So I first came to Mauritius about 5 years ago. And so before I came to Mauritius, I guess in large part what I considered to be Mauritian was quite, I guess, stereotypical Mauritian. I knew Mauritius was close to Africa, so I did have quite like a thought about, it's obviously going to be like quite influenced by Africa. I knew, of course, that there was beautiful beaches. I thought it was sort of like a untouched paradise. I mean, that was really sort of what I thought. I also thought, because I knew the official language of Mauritius was English, I thought it was quite, I guess within Africa, but sort of like westernized as well. But other than that, I didn't really know much about Mauritius before I came. I guess most of the imagery that I thought of Mauritius was probably from tourism ads, seeing the stereotypical like white beach and like pristine blue, water and everything, which in large part is not true. I mean, when you get to Mauritius, it's sort of, you do see those things, obviously, they are here, but then you also see quite a different reality, which I mean, I'm sure will come through in our discussion today, but you see, a lot of rubbish, for instance, which surprised me because I thought it was really like preserved and untouched, but there's a lot of rubbish. Mauritius is also much more developed than I thought it was. Like, we have a lot of buildings here that are, very, very developed, some even more so than what we have in Australia, the road system, obviously. But I think more than that, I was really shocked by the diversity of Mauritian people. You've got very diverse cultures here, very different religions. You can walk past a beautiful cathedral and then at the same time you'll see like a temple of some kind. And, you are sort of within Mauritius, you've got this juxtaposition of rich people in a very developed like post-colonial society, but you also have incredible poverty, which was something I didn't expect, and definitely something that's not showcased in like, sort of global media of Mauritius. Yeah. So that was probably my original like thoughts on Mauritius from an outsider perspective.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting that you're mentioning, like you're giving us your perspective from the outside. And it's interesting to see how Mauritius is being sold to people from outside, to the people from abroad. So there's very recently, we have the movie Serenity, which was shooted in Mauritius, and you have, very famous Hollywood actors, Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway. And I went online just to see what it was all about, and I came across some summaries about the plot, like summaries, and it's interesting to see how they portray the island. So I have two very good examples. In one, they say that the movie, the scene, like the movie is all about, the plot takes place in a small island in the Caribbean. And the other one...
Mauritius isn't anywhere near there.
Yeah, come on. And the other one talks about a mysterious tale and on a small island in the tropics. So I think that such portrayal of the island is interesting. Because first of all, it's on a small island in the Caribbean. It's like if we don't distinguish, we don't know the distinction between Mauritius and an island in the Caribbean. It's different. We're not the same. So it's like if we are putting Mauritius in a basket. Like it's an island. It's just an island, and we don't even mention the name. So we don't give it a name. And it's interesting to talk about how it's a mysterious tale. So it's important to know that very often, like in the 19th century, 18th century, island spaces were colonized, and they were very often portrayed as mysterious, as empty, as
waiting to be conquered.
Exactly. And these are things which happened like a long time ago. And when we read such things online, which were written like in 2017, we see that it's still here. Like it's a mysterious tale on a small island in the tropics.
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting. And then we can also think about islands as imagined spaces which receive meaning, which they are here, and people from outside just come and ascribe meaning to it.
They impose.
Exactly. I think earlier you mentioned, before the talk, so you mentioned liminal spaces, the notion of liminality. Yes. So again, it shows us how the island space is still a liminal space where people can still ascribe meaning to it. And reducing, and I think it's a form of reducing the island identity.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's also, if I may add, there's also living in this island, we can also use that, the people in the island, we can use that dynamic of being a liminal space to kind of ascertain our identity or make it evolve in a certain way. But I think the challenge would be to overcome the identity that's imposed on us.
So I think that's a very good thing, because it's a liminal space. We do have the power to resist, to create new things, to give new meanings, and to resist. That's it, and to negotiate.
Yeah,
definitely.
The enabling position that liminality actually allows us, or even bestows us in quite meaningful and quite creative ways is something I'm very interested in. But I just want to go back to a point you were saying, Milan, about how we are projected as an island. We, and I'm obviously speaking as we as a country here, but despite the fact that I am aware of some of this uncomfortable meanings of associating yourself with the rest of the population. But we can talk about that later. But what I wanted to piggyback on in what you were saying is, this kind of portrayal of Mauritius as this nondescript, indistinctive island to the rest of the world. Well, just, thinking about, when do you ever hear of Mauritius in international media? You hear of Mauritius because as when it gets voted top honeymoon destination,
definitely.
You hear of Mauritius when Paradise Island come here to spend quality time, or you hear on it when things go wrong in Paradise. So you hear of Mauritius when Michaela Hart was unfortunately murdered on the island, or when the debris of the Boeing 777, the Malaysian Airlines crashed and the debris was found on the island. You hear of it then, or you hear of it when professors in Wits discovered the remnants of a lost continent under the island. Or you hear of it because it's currently in the news for renegotiating the status of the Chagos Islands. But more and more, and I think this is where my interest with how celebrities view and give new meaning to our identity comes in. More and more you hear of Mauritius in the context of development. So I don't know if you guys have come across this article by Stiglitz a few years ago, the economist, Nobel Prize laureate, essentially hailed Mauritius as this model of economic development because we are such an example for social cohesion. We have such a wonderful working welfare state, and we've managed to get rid of inequality and such like, and the Mo Ibrahim Index constantly ranks us top, or even top 5, but usually just top. We've been top for quite a few years now. And obviously, if you ask any Mauritian, the ground realities are completely different. No Mauritian will come and admit to this being true. You ask a Mauritian, and the way that they'll react, you come to a Mauritian and say, Mauritius has just been voted for best for overall governance, and the Mauritian will probably tell you, but a country that gets voted best for overall governance does not kick its people out in the name of development, does not bulldoze over their houses. We don't kick people out. That's what the British did to Chagos, and that's why we are trying to portray us against. This is not us. We are better than that. And yet, in the face of celebrity exposure, we suddenly start gloating, and we start adopting this attitude of, this kind of smirking arrogance over this is our identity, and yes, we are represented by this. And I'm always fascinated with how we as Mauritians suddenly change our identity so quickly depending on who's talking about us, whether we adopt this very defensive attitude or we embrace it. What is it about the celebrity who barely knows about Mauritius, who comes here for about 5 days, that changes how we think about ourselves or what we say about ourselves?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because it's linked to the commodification of the island identity, of Mauritian identity. It's like you're saying, how Mauritius prides to be the top, always the top in economic development in the African region and all of these, and even in Asia. So Mauritius is like at the top. And then you have, this island being sold. We sell Mauritius as being the top in the economic sphere. And then we have Mauritius as a tropical island. And this is when we embrace this, African,
untouched by anything.
Paradise. And very, paradise. And this is when we navigate between two kinds of identities. So between Eastern identity with, very developed and all, and then we have this African identity, which is like an exotic identity, very closed, very tropical, and it's how we are being sold to the world. And it's really like navigating between these two. And I think that's really interesting.
And the benefits that they bring, obviously. I mean, one of the recent examples we've had in Australia is of Guy Sebastian, who won Australian Idol years and years and years ago. And then Air Asia started having that partnership where they were flying into Mauritius. And so for sort of the first time in a while, Air Mauritius, who was our main airline, had a competitor with the Australian market. And so obviously this opened up, more opportunities for Australians to travel relatively cheaply to Mauritius, which is a rather expensive destination for Australians. We'd rather go Southeast Asia or Bali or, any of these sort of places, New Zealand. And so through this sort of, I think he was the ambassador, Guy Sebastian became the ambassador, and they essentially flew him on Air Asia to Mauritius. And I believe he stayed at Club Med, which is, one of our nice, I guess, 4 or 5 star hotels. It's quite a nice one. And essentially, if you follow him on Instagram, all of the pictures that he posted while he was here, he and his family and 2 kids, I think, they didn't leave the hotel. Essentially you have just a picture of the pool and you have a picture of, I think, a beach shot and, and then there was this really random picture. I think at Club Med, they must have like a circus thing at Club Med. Like it's a service that they provide. It's like an activity, exactly. And so there's a picture like of his wife sort of like wrapped up in these sheets doing some sort of aerial, I don't know, acrobatics or something. And it's like, this is Mauritius. Like Australians who follow Guy Sebastian on Instagram see like an Instagram picture like #islandlife and essentially like a circus picture. And I mean, that's really it. It's
kind of funny when you think about it. It's like, bring your wife to Mauritius.
Yeah.
End up in sheets.
Actually acquire skills.
Yeah, new skills. So I mean, you get this sort of portrayal through, these Australian sort of celebrities that we see, and everyone's commenting like, oh, I can't wait to go there. And I'm like, he didn't leave the hotel.
I'd like to know your perspective about that duality of who we are and who we want to be, kind of, as Mauritians. Milan and Velita were talking about it. What's your opinion about Mauritians being really proud about the good things that occur in Mauritius and the bad things?
Like what's my opinion?
Yeah.
How do we like take one and like use it, or what do you mean, like what's my opinion about it?
How do you view it as an outsider? Do you think that we should only talk about the good things to overcome the bad things, or do we?
I mean, it's a difficult position to be in because tourism in Mauritius is its number one export to a certain extent. Like that's how Mauritians make their money, through tourism. You've got like 150 hotels on this tiny little island.
Or service industry.
So I mean, it's important to a certain extent that we do see these images, because otherwise no one would ever come here. I saw this image the other day on Facebook where they were saying like, don't go to Hotel Lux because they're dumping rubbish. And so this idea of locals trying to, they need the tourism, but at the same time they want you to be like ethical tourists when you do come. So it's a really difficult one, I think, because when you live here and you get to see that both sort of sides of the coin, because as well, you know, everyone likes to go to a hotel. It's a nice thing for even locals to do. But I think just presenting more, particularly with an international media, presenting a more realistic portrayal of locals. We need to have diversity. Diversity. I mean, Matthew McConaughey made a really good point. I think he was interviewed when he went back to the States, and he said something like, no Mauritian looks the same. And you do see that, like when you come here, you see that you have such different physical characteristics within Mauritian people. Like you can't tell a Mauritian person really at all until they start speaking French or they start speaking Creole. You don't really know if that person's Mauritian, because you have white people in Mauritius, you have a lot of Asian characteristics in Mauritius, you've got a lot of the Indian, you've got a lot of the African. And so it was really nice to hear him say that no one in Mauritius really looks the same, because that is such like a good, I think, representation of what Mauritius is. You can't put Mauritians in a box, and they've been put in a box, I think, for a very long time, as you know, all through the examples that we've stated.
And I think that one of the, like, we should be very careful with the portrayal of Mauritius. Of course, it's important. Like the tourism industry is very important in Mauritius. But there's also the risk of, you know, effacing the inhabitants. Like I've saw some of the pictures of the shooting, like the movie has not been released yet. So there's no trailer, but there are some pictures. And in all of them, you just have, you know, the landscape, and then you have the two white characters. And you don't really see much. So I don't know what will happen in the movie. So we don't really know how are we going to portray the inhabitants.
Will Mauritians
how are we going to portray Mauritius? Are we going to focus only on the landscape, and then we have these, you know, European characters in the movie, or are they going to show like a more or less objective perspective of Mauritius, like an image of Mauritius which would more or less represent Mauritian diversity? Like the food, you know, people, like she said, we all look different. So how is it going to be? Is it going to be like just the landscape and that's it? So at the end of the day, Mauritius is reduced to a landscape, tropical island. And
I suppose, well, that's kind of the approach that they used for the film, right? They came to Mauritius for the scenery more than the island itself. So it's just as you said, for the landscape. It's just an environment that fit their narrative.
It's a backdrop to your story.
Exactly.
And that's it. And at the end of the day, they're just exploiting that. They're just like, and people are consuming that. And it's dangerous.
It makes me think of that quote from Mark Twain, the famous one.
Which famous one?
Mauritius
was created after. No, heaven was created after Mauritius, wasn't it?
Like that.
No, I do completely agree, and I think you know, it's interesting for us as you know, as critical thinkers to analyze what happens to a country's identity when what you want to take from that country is not its identity, but the landscape.
Just exploiting the landscape.
But at the same time, that being said, I do often you know, question this whole notion of identity itself. You know, is the limits of your nation the best way to organize your identity, really? I mean, I don't know that I have an answer to it, but these are questions I do often ask myself.
I think that gives us, I don't know, a little bit of things to think about. And who knows what the future will hold, right? I think it's a good point to wrap up this little conversation, which has been really fun. Really fun. And informative as well.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks guys. Till next time.
Next time.